Welcome. Thank you for coming. It was the best of times. It was actually the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were going direct to heaven, or we were going direct the other way. And in short, the period was so far like the present period that some of the noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil in the superlative degree of comparison only. I am Neil Lester. I'm a professor of English at Arizona State University. I also serve as the Associate Vice President for Humanities and Arts in the Office of Knowledge Enterprise Development. And I also direct something at Arizona State called Project Humanities. And Project Humanities is, in many ways, what sort of inspired this question that I hope we will try to address. Not necessarily answer, but address in some meaningful way, meaningful for us, but also meaningful for you. It's interesting that when the question of are we losing our humanity was posed, it was actually very nuanced in my thinking. And so I had the audacity to write an op-ed piece. And in the op-ed piece, I ask, do decency, integrity, ethics, forgiveness, respect, thoughtfulness, self-reflection, kindness, empathy, civility, morality, generosity, hope, honesty, do any of these things mean anything to anyone today? And are these traits of weakness that separate the sheep from the wolves, the leaders from the followers, the innovators from the implementers? How do we determine what really matters in the world and in our lives, and what tools do we use to know that? We don't have to look far to see that newspaper, radio, and other outlets continually crawl with headlines that reveal an unparalleled urgency to be somewhere, to do something, to say something, to post something. Now, when I posted this, I was actually quite surprised, perhaps naively so, that some of the responses I got, well, you tell me if you're surprised. This was just to the op-ed piece. I had somebody say, unfortunately, Neil, you will only be preaching to the choir when you ask this question and bring people together. Civility is dead. Our national leaders killed it in the name of politics. Now, I merely ask questions here, but somebody read through questions apparently and figured out what I wanted to know. Winning at all costs is what matters, not civility now. Dick Cheney spouted the F word on the Senate floor. The president of the USA was called a liar to his face in public. There's no honesty on Wall Street, in politics, or anywhere else. It's every man for himself. That was one response. But here's the one that I thought was most challenging. My God, the civil rights movement all over again, 50 years ago. We've already done that. I am sick of our local TV stations and newspapers running bleeding heart stories about illegal alien families that are being ripped apart, lots of caps here, with these criminals, when these criminals get caught. I knew the moment that I started reading this column that it would end up being just another anti-white, anti-capitalist, anti-American piece of propaganda for the left wing. My op-ed appeared with a picture. So I ask, not in the spirit of trying to be tricky, but a question that I think really matters. And the response of you to coming to this event suggests that you want to know or have something to contribute to this conversation too. As a way of discussing this, we've assembled a panelist of, I think, very diverse backgrounds and perspectives. And the format is that we will have a little conversation and then engage you so that we can actually move from this moment, not just in the spirit of talking, listening, and connecting, but talking, listening, connecting, and doing something. So at the end of this, you will have an assignment, okay? And we will be calling you to honor the assignments we've given. I have a few of my friends to help me out, and moderating today will be Executive Director of the MLA Modern Language Association, Rosemary Feal. I am Neil Lester, as I mentioned. We also have John Churchill, who's the Secretary of Phi Beta Kappa Society. We have E. Wayne Holden, the President and CEO of RTI International. We have Sally Kitch, the Director of the Institute for Humanities Research and a Professor of Women and Gender Studies at Arizona State University. Nick Lambesis, who is Chairman and founder of the Lambesis Agency, had a family emergency and could not be here, so apologizes, but will be part of our next steps. We have Esther McIntosh, the President of the Federation of State Humanities Councils, Esther. Cora Merritt, who is the Deputy Director of the National Science Foundation. Christine Rosen, the Schwartz Fellow at the New America Foundation and Senior Editor of the New Atlantis. Jean Schwam, co-founder and CEO of Hansen and Schwam Public Relations. And last but not least, Rafael Rengel Sostman, President of Tecnologica de Monterrey Foundation and Presidential Professor of Practice for Education and Innovation and Special Advisor to the President of Arizona State University. This is your conversation. Thank you for being here. Let's talk, let's listen, let's connect.
Good morning. Those of you who know me know that I don't normally come with a Lauren Bacall voice, so I hope it isn't too grating on your ears, and I will try to do my best not to cough during this wonderful discussion we're about to have. It's good to see many friends, and it's also good to see people who I haven't seen at events like this. Let us start by asking what this question is about. Are we losing our humanity? So I'd like each of our panelists to say what this question means to them. What did they think when they first read it? What were their fears? What are their perhaps attractions to the question? And try to wrap our heads around just the premise of this panel. So I'm going to go right down the line, starting with Sally.
Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to see you here. I found every word of this question, are we losing our humanity, very evocative. I could have written op-ed pieces on every single word, but this morning I just like to look at the word losing, because there's something both disturbing and promising about a word that ends in ing, because it's something that isn't moving. And so when I think of losing, I also think of seeking. And I think about the way that humanity is something that we seek all throughout our lives. And if there are moments when it feels like we're tumbling down the mountain and losing it, there's also the promise of re-seeking it and getting connected to it again. And this election season reminds me that one of the things that we can do as a society is provide many opportunities for people to think about what is humanity, what is our humanity, who are the we in the our, and what does humanity mean. And so, call me an optimist, I like to think that there is something on the other side of losing, and the re-seeking is what I hope that we can focus on.
Thank you. Wayne?
Sure. So my, reaction to the question is more about evolution and how are we evolving humanity into the future in an increasingly interconnected, global, and diverse world that we all live in, and how do we take advantage of the opportunity to take those factors and mesh and evolve things as we move forward, rather than losing the opportunity to do them and ending up in a place that isn't the place that we want to be in the future.
I think that what it means to be human is the ability to exercise empathy, to put ourselves in other people's shoes and try to understand their perspective. And I think, to be a little bit more pessimistic, that we are at risk of losing one aspect of our humanity, and that's that we mistake connection and communication. And we have a vast array of technologies that allow us to communicate instantaneously around the globe these days, but that's not the same thing as connection. And so I would urge us to think a little bit about whether being human means mediating every one of our daily experiences, whether it's through the technologies we have in our hand or the technologies that are distributed on Wall Street or through our government, and to think about whether they encourage or discourage the exercise of empathy.
I think I'd like to see us this morning, as we reflect on this question, maintain a focus on the fact that it's a kind of a scary question, and ask ourselves as we go along, what is it that gives this question its heft and its threatening character? And surely that's going to involve examining what we mean by this word humanity. And as posed in the context of this question, and Neil Lester touched on this with his litany of attributes or qualities that he gave in his introduction, surely the notion of humaneness and the notion of what it is that makes us human is at stake here. And the threat lies in the prospect that whatever that is, we may be in process of forfeiting it, or maybe in process of becoming less fully realized versions of what as human beings and as a human society we can be. I hope that as we go along we get to look at some specific, for instances, of what an account of that humanness might be.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, for me, the question is related with the importance that the universities are giving to the humanities, especially in the area of engineering, business, and the effect it is going to have in our societies. I'm coming from another country, Mexico, but I see it also happening in this country. And sometimes we substitute the humanities areas in those fields, technology, business, engineering, for other which is more focused in their field. And at the long run, it's going to be effect on the graduates and in the society. And for me, that's what the question is related to.
As I looked at the question, I thought it really represented two questions. One is what's happening to us as humans, the humaneness that John just mentioned. And then the second is what's going on with the humanities, with those branches of learning that are particularly concerned with knowledge, human constructs. So those are the things that were guiding me as I began to try to reflect on the question.
My immediate response to this question was are we losing our humanity, was a reflection that there is a fear out there that we are losing one of our most fundamental abilities as humans, and that is to connect and engage. I think the discontent with our political rhetoric is not only that it prevents us from really moving forward, but maybe even more that it reflects an anxiety that we're losing the will and the practice of learning how to truly connect and engage. I think the reverse side of that, though, I think there is a bright spot to this question, and the very asking of the question suggests that there is a deep wish to reestablish this kind of connection and engagement, and that's what I hope we can build on.
I think that when we look at humanity, we're also drawn into the idea of morality. And I think that both of them are relative terms. They don't apply to everybody. And that's what seems to be part of the challenge, is because different people, different cultures, different ways of thinking are all asked to embrace a singular thing. And that singular thing has many different parts relative to their circumstances. So I believe we need to define in more direct terms a method of helping people to be educated, to educate their friends, their families, their children, and do it from the ground up so that we start with a fresh group of people who are not spoiled or compromised by money or politics. And we start working on tomorrow's people rather than today's, who aren't going to change very much.
Well, that was a provocative last statement. So bring your newborn grandchildren along, because we have a program for them. Seriously, I thank you all for your opening thoughts on what the question means. And I want to follow up with the next implicit question. If we're losing our humanity, when did we have it? What was it? What were those values? And how did we know it? And I'm going to start with Sally, but I'm not going all the way down the line. Sally, what was being human?
Well, I think the question is, was there ever a time that we had this humanity that we think we are losing. And as somebody who likes to bring a historical perspective to all inquiry, that was one of the things that occurred to me also about this question. Are we imagining that there was a time, a golden time, when everyone connected as well as communicated, or everyone had the kind of morality that we're hoping to instill in our own children, for example? And as a historian of utopias, I have to say that that's more of an idea than a reality. And we can attach ourselves to the idea, recognizing that the reality has probably always been a little short of whatever ideal we might be bringing, might be coming to our mind, which doesn't mean we shouldn't pursue ideals, but simply that imagining that there was a time when everyone was kind to one another, compassionate, morally upright, and never cheated or lied or did anything that we would consider inhumane is wrong. And that we have to recognize that part of our humanity are the things that we disdain about human beings. Greed and the quest for power drives a lot of what happens in our world, and that's part of the human condition. So what it means is that we want to construct a culture in which we can provide people opportunities to make humane decisions and choices. And so I think that's what the historical perspective might give us.
And where do these values come from that we're talking about? Obviously, they're developed over time and in civilization, but where concretely do the values of humanity emerge? From where do they emerge? Esther?
This gets into the humanities, I do believe, because we have at our disposal a whole body of history and great thinking and literature about how people have lived together, how they have made decisions, and how the values that they bring to those decisions and those activities have helped shape what happens next. I think we can actually learn from those about some humanistic values that we can carry forward and that can help us make our own decisions.
We're talking about losing our humanity. What is the counter to humanity? Is it sciences and humanities? Is it the human versus the non-human? How do we get to think about this big question? Since I said the word science, I must call on Cora from the National Science Foundation to give your perspective on this question of losing the human and science.
I'm struck first by the comments that we heard initially. I'm not sure it makes a lot of sense to talk about losing, because that doesn't really represent what was being suggested, and that is, what do we want to build towards? And when I looked at the question, I said, this is quite interesting, because it seems to suggest that on the one side would be the humanities, and on the other side, science and technology. And I just can't accept that kind of divide very easily, and let me explain why. With reference to what happens, science, think about one of the human qualities we seek to advance, and that's the idea of curiosity. People are naturally curious. And that's a part of whether it's the science of looking at the universe, as in physics and astronomy, for example, the questions about life and biology, the questions about the human condition, the social sciences, the psychological sciences are all about the human condition in so many ways. The other part of it is, and I won't go into a lot right now, but would be more than willing to talk later, about how at the National Science Foundation this idea of compassion is actually built into the very requirement we have that any proposal to get funded has to be intellectually sound, but it has to have broader impacts as well. We have, in addition, the kinds of requirements for graduate preparation in ethics. We have the things that cross between the National Science Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Endowment for the Arts, suggesting that the concerns about knowledge, about the human condition really are matters that transcend fields. Thus, I looked at the question, and that's why I said I was coming back to when we talk about compassion, when we talk about humaneness, those don't have to be limited to any given set of fields. And when we talk about branches of learning about the human condition, those really do transcend our disciplines as well.
Christine, would you like to follow up on this relation between the scientific, the technological, the humane, and the potential losses that you hinted at when you made the distinctions among communications and connections and so forth?
Sure. I do think that when we think about how we use technology, which has brought us many great rewards, we're forgetting one important thing, which is human nature, and not to be the skunk at the garden party again, but all of the things that Sally had mentioned, there are all these good things about human nature, but there are also all these bad things. And I think as we look at the tools that we devise, particularly our personal technologies, we need to think about whether they're encouraging us to transcend some of our bodily limits. And by that I mean, are we looking each other in the eye when we talk to each other? Are we mediating every experience through a screen? Are we outsourcing things like the serendipity of bumping into someone and getting to know them? Because our technologists, although brilliant in many ways, are also eager to turn a lot of those human skills and intuitions over to algorithms, and they're very successful at doing it. It's why Amazon knows exactly the next book you want to buy when you've bought a first one, and it's usually right. It's uncanny. And the reason I think it's uncanny in many instances is that it's butting up against this deeply humane intuition. And all of that comes back to our physical bodies, much of which we spend our time buffing, polishing, sheening, and trying to pretend we don't have. So I think a lot of the question of the humanities, I mean, read Jonathan Swift, so read Lawrence Stern. These earlier writers understood the limitations of our physical bodies, and I think looking at the question from that angle gives us a little more humility in thinking about how we behave today.
As if we needed more humility, but I agreed. Rafael, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, but also the technology is giving us the opportunity to increase in other relationships, especially in my experience with the underserved. If maybe you are not looking the eyes of the other person, but somebody from the remote areas in Mexico and remote areas of Africa is having access to education and to other people who are very qualified, that in the past was impossible. So we have to see it in the positive side and see how can we incorporate in our culture and our good all this, what is coming, that I feel like more than looking at we are not looking complete every day, the eyes, we are looking many other opportunities.
Wayne, how do we do this? How do we incorporate values in this hyper-connected world?
Well, just to reflect on something that was said previously, I mean, I don't think that there's a bifurcation between science and the humanities. I think science is very much a part of human experience and the humanities. And I think science driving us towards improving the world and improving the human condition is a very important ethic and a very important value driving us forward. I think that we need to carefully balance the issues of technology and humanities. I think there are examples where we're doing that and using technology to bridge the gap of communication. We're using technology to educate people about interpersonal and emotional experience and helping them with that. I spend a lot of time running an organization with 4,000 people and 50 projects in 50 different countries around the world, where we're dealing with the issues of diversity, interconnectedness, understanding different cultures, understanding how to weave all that together to improve the human condition, and try to use technology to enhance our ability to do that. The flip side for me personally is I spend a lot of time with my 3-year-old grandson trying to understand his world as he's learning how to navigate an iPad at age 3. And very much learning how to navigate an iPad in a way that's more educational for him because he has the appropriate kind of structure around him to do that, which gets you to thinking about what that's going to be like in 25 years or so, and how can we capitalize on that to improve our ability to interact with each other and to continue to improve the human condition.
John, what do you think?
Address this issue about technology because I think there's something deeply important here, and I think Christine has pointed us toward it in talking about the this mediation, the distancing, and the loss of interpersonal contact. But I think that's symptomatic of something much deeper, and that works like this: technology, and we're thinking here of the technologies of communication principally so far. These are very visible examples of the characteristic modern genius for rationalizing means-end relationships and for helping us to become very efficient at achieving ends that we presume that we want. We then become fascinated with the means and fixated upon the ends to the atrophy of a very important dimension of what makes us actually human, namely the capacity to choose ends, to deliberate about choosing ends, and to assess means, and to reevaluate means, and to watch for unintended side effects. That dimension of consideration of whether we want that and whether this is the way we should pursue what we want may be the characteristic humaneness that's getting obscured and getting left behind in our fascination with the efficiency of the technologies that are at hand. And that's the way in which it seems to me that technology can occlude the deeper dimensions of our humanity.
What should we want? What do you think, Jean? What should we want, and how can we promote what it is that we value to those Garden of Eden children who have not yet been exposed to the corruption that you basically pointed to?
Well, I think that talking about technology, today technology is a shield. It hides the face of the people's behavior. They talk words, but they don't live deeds. And so one of the things that we have to deal with is a filter. We have to create a standard of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in a humane society. And until we have a standard, and we decide on that standard, and then we teach that standard, and we provide it to people who are looking for something to grab hold of, we're just going to be using words and not deeds.
Words, not deeds. You know, you mentioned education, and obviously we have people on the panel in the world of education and in the world of government. What are the roles of the academy and of the government, federal government, state governments, in promoting our humanity and helping us in this question of preserving and gaining that which makes us most human? Let's start with some government folk. Esther, well, not government, but involved in lobbying
dealing with the government,
dealing with the government, but organizing at the state level, the federal level. What do you think about the role of government in this?
Well, I mean, obviously, because I work with an organization that, a group of organizations that do their work with the support of both state and, in many cases, and federal government, I believe that the role that the government can play is extremely important in providing opportunities not only for the sort of advancement of education and technology that has been talked about all along here, but as I referenced earlier, for providing those opportunities for reinstating genuine engagement and connection between people. The programs that, for example, the state humanities councils do every single day all across the country encourage people to actually have this kind of face-to-face interaction and engagement, looking at really genuine, substantive, significant problems that we're looking at. The government can encourage that kind of communication and that kind of engagement, I think, not only with financial support, which of course we all are working for, but with a kind of encouragement of this sort of model of connecting with one another over issues of significance.
Cora?
Yes, well, perhaps not surprisingly, from where I sit, I think of government as having a particular role in advancing research and knowledge, because a lot of the comments made are often based on assumptions and not on the knowledge about the kinds of developments. Listening and thinking again about Sally's comments, that's the research on the history of different technologies, for example. Since we know that the same kinds of things being raised now were often raised earlier about electricity, about the telephone, about those kinds of things that would make such a difference, understanding historically what's happened is especially important. This kind of distinction that might be drawn, we're talking about communications and information technology, but that's not the only kind of technology that's around. If we think about medical technology, if we think about the technology of robots, the kinds of questions that are worth examining then are the things that I think clearly belong in the world of higher education and research, that an agency like the foundation, like the endowments, ought to be able to help us unravel some of the complexities and avoid then the kinds of, the ease with which we could make a lot of assumptions. Now, I would agree that there is an education component to this, but that education component is in part helping people understand how systematically to gather, to assemble information, and also how to act on it. And so a part of this is the strong emphasis, for example, including in the graduate curriculum, even the undergraduate world, about the matters of ethics in science. So we do have a great deal of emphasis of saying it's not just a matter of preparing people to be able to do the research, but to understand what are some of the questions about the humaneness, about how to make sure that the work is done in ways that will not undermine the kinds of compassion and other issues we're thinking about.
Thank you. Sally, thinking about this question that Cora just raised, the connection between education and teaching values, do you think that studying the humanities and the history of science and so forth makes us more humane?
If it did, I guess people like me would be the paragons of virtue, and I don't think we are necessarily. But what I think that education offers us is opportunity. Now, we hear that word a lot. If you've paid attention to the election, it's the key word of this election, opportunity, which is often translated into opportunity for financial success or for some kind of achievement. But it's also, I think education offers a much more important kind of opportunity. And that is the opportunity to contemplate other ways of being in the world besides the way that you've just come into it. And the thing that gets lost, if we're back to the losing, sometimes in certain approaches to education is that opportunity. The opportunity to interact personally with other people from different parts of the world and different ways of organizing truth and virtue. But also the idea that we can read and we can educate ourselves about other times and other locations and other consciousnesses, because the consciousness that we develop over our lifetime really determines the quality of our lives. And I think that's what education in the humanities, and I'm like others on the panel, I don't make a strong distinction among these disciplines, but because I think they're intertwined, but I think the opportunity to develop a consciousness that has an awareness of all these different approaches and making conscious decisions about who you will be, that's the real benefit of an education. And that's where I think we can produce something like humanity.
Rafael, I see you nodding. I take it you're in agreement with Sally on this.
I'm just going to retake what Sally is saying, but for me, the consciousness, of course, is one of the main objectives for me of putting humanities, ethics, social responsibility as a part of the curriculum. But it's not only the curriculum part, but it's also the message that the authorities and the whole community is giving to the students. If you just put 1 or 2, 3 courses in ethics, that's fine, but that's not enough. You have to really, the whole community has to be having that, embrace that as something that is very important. And sometimes it's called ethics along the curriculum, across the curriculum, but every professor, doesn't matter what his field is, he has to bring a case of a dilemma in order to bring their students and discuss and debate what is wrong, what's right. And everybody has to build their own conscience, but it's with the debate. But it's not only with 2 or 3 courses in ethics that is going to solve the problem. It's the whole community. And it's starting by the mission of the university, it's starting by the president, it's starting by everybody. That's my answer.
Yes, Wayne.
So just as a follow-up to that, it's incumbent on people and organizations outside of academia that people go to in the world of work to strongly have a sense of values, a sense of ethics, and for that to pervade the organization, for that to be real, so that it's not just a learning experience as part of your education and training, and then you get into the world and other pressures corrupt that. So organizations, I think, really need to make that a significant priority internal to the organization in the way that they interact with people outside to try to help people learn how to really live that once they've gotten their education and get out into the world. And the leaders of organizations, it's incumbent upon them to be champions of all that and drive that forward. And I think we've lost some of that in the last decade or two, where leadership gets corrupted by other forces driving leaders in different directions, rather than leaders being the champions of a broader mission that you're trying to drive with people going forward.
Gene, you're in Hollywood. Talk to us about ethics.
I think that the most important thing for people in my profession as PR and marketing is to have content that has value that we can go out and promote with good conscience. I think one of the big problems we're having is that the public is being sold something that is neither fair nor just right now. And the American dream is now a nightmare. And we have to adjust to the fact that in order to accomplish a moral, humane society, we have to deal more with the people on the bottom, the unrepresented, the middle-class people. And we need role models on the top that encourage and appreciate and acknowledge the people who are never going to all be entrepreneurial, or not all going to be able to afford a home and all of those things. But that does not mean they're not successful. And we have to change the word of success from a material to an emotional and a personal method.
Whoa. John, I'm thinking a little bit about the discussion that you didn't hear last night, which concerned reading and literacy and how our relation to the written word and the history of ideas as passed down through the written word is changing. And as I'm hearing about access to education and about diversity in our approaches to what we consider ethics, values, the human, I'm wondering if you could reflect a bit on our technologies of reading, if you will.
While the rest of the group was having conversation last night, I was sitting on an airplane with my iPad, reading the Michael Pollan's The Botany of Desire, and Friedrich Gerstacker's Die Flusspiraten des Mississippi, which is a 1840s novel set in Helena, Arkansas. You can imagine why I had some interest in that piece of writing. I think Rosemary, we're in a period in which we can move happily from medium to medium. I know there's a lot of worry about reading on traditional paper texts and reading on screens of various sizes and the relationship between a literate society and a society dominated by images, and that has to do with the rapidity of experience and the fast succession in the world of images as opposed to the more leisurely pace of the written word and the sort of discursive pace of all that. I think there are real worries there, but I think we have to plunge into these different modes of access to narrative. And I think narrative is the key idea here. Reading is a vehicle for getting us into stories about what human beings have done in the course of their lives, things they've done that have mattered, about the ways in which they've behaved well and poorly. And it's broad familiarity across a culture with a wide treasury of stories and narratives and cases and exemplars of human behavior that enrich a culture and give its people the ability to have coherent conversations about what's good and bad and what they ought to choose. And to the extent that we can get more cases and exemplars and more people out there and more people thinking about what this person did then and then what happened and what that means for the structure of a just society, the more ways we can get at that, the better off we will be.
Esther?
Agree more with everything that John said about the value of literature. I think I want to go back, all the way back to Sally's very first comment about the separate words in this question and the word losing. And I think maybe a part of the reason that people are anxious right now about losing our humanity is that we are in such an undeniable period of transition in terms of how we relate, how we learn, how we connect. And I haven't yet gotten to reading the way you're reading, John, though I'm about to. I do plenty of that. But I do think that it raises questions for people about when things change so rapidly in terms of how we even gain information and then how we convey information to each other. It raises some questions about what we are losing along the way, and I think it may be just a question of having not quite yet adjusted to the whole new ways of communicating and relating. I just heard a story before coming up to this panel about a piece of information that got conveyed by phone, a decision that got made by phone in one corner of a room, and before that person who made the decision could get to the other corner of the room, everybody over there already knew because it had been tweeted. So I think a part of our anxieties is just trying to keep catching up with these new definitions of how humans communicate and connect.
Christine?
I completely agree, and I think what John said about narrative is very important, so let me give a narrative. Once upon a time, I asked my friend John if I could borrow his copy of The Botany of Desire. Unfortunately, he said, no, I can't loan it to you because it's on my iPad. I don't own it. I can't share it with you unless I'm sharing a library of devices, and I think what I'm trying to get at is something that Wayne said that was really important, which is that this is a transition, and that creates a lot of anxiety, and these questions of reading in print versus reading on the screen are important, but they're also a question of gatekeepers, and right now there are just a handful of gatekeepers that are controlling these texts. There was this outrage a year or so ago when the Kindle removed 1984 because of copyright infringement, so you could own 1984 on your device, and then suddenly it wasn't there, and all the people who owned their Kindle said, well, don't I own that book? No, they didn't. They owned the right to read it on that device. They did not own the text. And that's a huge change. And I think that this gets to what Wayne was saying, which is that organizations have to be accountable and have an ethical compass if they are the gatekeepers of literacy, if they are the gatekeepers of how we teach the next generation. And I, having studied some of these tech companies, can tell you, I'm a little concerned about the moral compass. You can't even get a human being on the phone at Amazon or Google, can you? Now, you can go to the Genius Bar and be told by a genius that your hard drive has melted, which happened to me last week, and you feel slightly reassured that a genius has told you this. But since the genius has to box it up and ship the computer elsewhere, you start to question their genius. So I just think on this issue of humanities and ethics, I think Wayne is absolutely right. We have to be willing, both just as individual citizens and as members of our own institutions, to question the people who are the gatekeepers for these.
Cora?
I know a part of the point of this panel will be to stimulate questions and issues, and these are being stimulated for me right now. With reference to reading, certainly, I'm fully supportive of reading, having served once on the National Reading Panel. But as I was listening to it, it's really this question I think that's coming up of what is it we're seeking to do? We're talking about access to a past that we didn't know. We're talking about access to worlds we don't know. We're talking about possibilities for the future, that there might be ways for advancing, enhancing those kinds of things in a world that goes beyond then what we once had to rely very much on. And I'm thinking about what's possible now through the images that we can have of very different worlds, looking at what happens with art collections, for example, that you don't have to be at the collection anymore to be able to appreciate what's taking place. So I think, in fact, as the guester's comments are very much along those lines, to think about we are possibly in a period of transition in a lot of ways, and to think of what are the ways for using a lot of things that are surrounding us to really enhance the kinds of things that we are very much interested in when we think broadly of what we want to be as human beings.
Cora and Sally are the designated optimists on the panel, by the way. So Wayne, I don't know whether you're the designated neutral party, but would you like to comment?
Sure. So one of the things I would just say with respect to literacy is I think it's important to take a global perspective. And I think it's important to think about literacy worldwide. We've done a reasonable amount of work in sub-Saharan Africa trying to work with encouraging the development of early literacy skills in children and figuring out what's the best way of doing that. And so I think we don't want to get, again, the world is a global world. It's an interconnected world. The use of technology is different. If we can somehow in a very rudimentary wireless framework get some information to a teacher in sub-Saharan Africa that helps them with some specific tips that will promote early literacy skills in 6 to 8-year-olds, it's an outstanding accomplishment. So someone said earlier in a discussion we had in the other room, the issue with technology is it's just there's so many broad applications and so different that I think we need to keep that in mind with respect to where we're headed and how all this continues to evolve across time.
Yes.
One of the things that we have learned in selling motion pictures and television and recordings is the visual image. And I think that we have to develop a way to use visualization as well as words, because more and more people are getting their information from what they see as well as what they hear. And I think we can do that particularly with young people. We can start with the lower grades of education where we can do CGI, where we can do animation, where we can do things that are interesting to them in 3D and bring them into a new way of thinking. And I think that what we found in selling a movie, I happen to be involved in a film right now about a returning Marine combat veteran suffering from post-traumatic stress and his difficulty in adjusting to a normal civilian life. And one of the most important things I found was not the words so much that we were using once we got the message straight, but was for people to see the film, to see a soundbite, to understand the emotion that is involved. Because I think, though it is essential that we have a higher intelligence or understanding of things, it is also equally important that we can transfer that information to an emotional level, which is where most people live. And so I think it's very important that education not be just about words, but that it can be defined in visual imagery.
You know, yes, I'm going to ask Sally to comment and then ask another question. Go ahead, Sally.
Well, your comments remind me of something that we need to think about in terms of the word literacy. I think we often use it just to mean the ability to handle the written word, But in the contemporary world, we have to redefine literacy in the ways that you're talking about. Not only that people learn how to process different kinds of input into their brains, including the visual, but that they also learn to stand back from the technologies that are delivering those messages and be able to evaluate them. So we talk now in education about digital literacy, so that not only can you use those images, but that you can understand how they work on you, and that you can understand how the written word works on you in transforming your consciousness. And a large part of this new literacy training needs to include expansion of the attention span. One of the things that has really struck educators over the years, and I've been at this for a very long time, is how much reduced most students' attention spans are. And now people who deliver lecture classes, and those do still exist in real life, in real time, realize that they have to break the period down into 15-minute increments, because that's it. That's what the students really can do. So as we think about revamping education, that's one of the things we need now to train students how to do, is expand their own attention span.
You know, there's a slow reading movement, and I think
Yes.
there is. And part of the idea is precisely that, to learn to sit with a text and think.
Right.
I'd like to now ask each of you to address the following, and then I'm going to open it up to all of you to continue the conversation. Studying the humanities, it's often been said, cliche if you wish, that studying the humanities makes us more humane, gives us the possibility to develop ethical and a moral compass, and so on. Obviously, all of you have talked about access to what the humanities represents. And when I say humanities, I'm including also the history of science and things beyond the narrow, what you might think of narrowly. What does doing the humanities for you mean, as opposed to studying the humanities? And does that make a difference when we talk about preserving or furthering our humanity? What does doing the humanities mean? I think you all do the humanities, so I'd like to hear your views on that and then open it up. So we'll start with you.
Well, I thought that it was kind of interesting when, in this political climate, that the whole healthcare situation was being attacked, and particularly Obamacare. And then someone said, you know, we can take one letter and change the whole meaning. And so it became Obama Cares. And that changed the complexity of something. So you can see how important it is for the language to be able to be communicated. So I believe if we can make our points, we can then call upon the better things in a person's character to make it grow. They need help, and we should help them because they deserve it.
Thank you, Jean. Esther?
A lot of people who don't study the humanities do the humanities all the time. And I think that the doing of the humanities is been talked about several times in these remarks, but it goes all the way back to the notion of actually really listening to other viewpoints and maybe even changing your own viewpoint because of ideas that you hear in actual engagement with other human beings.
Esther helped me tremendously because I wasn't sure what I would say. And when she said doing the humanities may be quite different from studying, and what I wanted to emphasize again is that in those fields we might call the sciences, there is the kind of possibilities for doing the humane work, for expressing the compassion, the empathy, helping to reveal those sorts of concerns that are there. So I think, and just studying alone isn't something that will necessarily lead one to take a particular stance. I'm reminded of a comment made often about in the social sciences. It said studying the social sciences doesn't mean that you end up being that much more compassionate about people. You now have, unless it's coupled with something else, you have this capacity to do the inquiry. So it's more than studying, and it's more than being limited or confined to particular fields. I think that's certainly what I was hearing from the people who preceded me.
Thank you. Raphael?
Yeah, for me, it's being an engineer, you have to measure if you're really affecting or influence positively the students when they go through the educational system. You can teach a lot of social responsibility, ethics, but if really you are not changing their way of their rationale and their way of they looking the problems, and you don't teach them how to act in a dilemma which is not white and black, and how to take a decision. But you have to measure that, because otherwise it's just good wishes. So you have to, we did in our universities to try to measure the rationale of the ethics of every student when they come in, the social responsibility, or more or less we're trying to do that. And then at the end, we did the same thing. And then we are influencing them positively, or maybe we are just giving them another course. Because otherwise we have to redo our curriculum, we have to do the way they were doing. And something that we find out is that the courses by themselves, and I said before, was not enough. At least they hear from all the community that they have to do something. They will start to see the paradigms in their professors. Not only the paradigm of one professor who teaches humanities, but the whole community has to give that paradigm. And that's something. I'm going to just, because Jim said something about technology, and also Sally mentioned something about that. Something that I observe is that the way to use the multimedia is neglected right now in many of the, what I call teacher colleges. I continue with the same system of books, the same system of fixed curriculum, and if you want to train the professors how to use the multimedia and bring all these possibilities to their students, they say, well, that's not possible, this is not in the curriculum. And I think we are losing a big, important point, because you have to start when you are young. You have to start to talk about those. You have to use the e-books when you are very young, but to enrich the education. That's my thing. Okay?
Thank you. John?
Yes, I'd like to connect my previous point about the quality of the choices we make for setting objectives for ourselves as a society with the earlier question about the role of government in supporting humanity and supporting the humanities. And the connection, it seems to me, is this, that a democracy has a stake in maintaining the conditions of its own existence. And that means that a democracy has a stake in enlarging the capacities of its people to make good choices about what ends they're going to pursue as a society. That means that a democracy has a stake in enhancing people's deliberative capacities. The humanities are the workshop within which we maintain our capacities for critical reflection and critical analysis on the ends we choose, and for constructive vision about those ends, and for sensitive awareness that will keep us from being the victims of unintended consequences as we pursue those ends. And that's why the humanities are essential to the flourishing of a democratic society, and that's why there's a role of government, an appropriate role for government in a democratic society to support the humanities.
Thank you. Christine?
I agree with him. Actually, drawing on what John said, which I think is absolutely correct, doing the humanities versus studying them, I think we draw on the knowledge of all the wonderful scholars who've taught us about the humanities, but to do them, in my opinion, is to do something a little bit different, which is to challenge our conventional wisdom and some of the pieties we all embrace in our day-to-day lives, and ask the same question over and over again. Just because we can do something, should we? This gets to the means and ends question. It's sort of a similar way of wording that. And I think the role of people who try to do the humanities is to constantly remember that history is littered with examples of societies and cultures that answered that question in the wrong way. So if we keep as our guide the history of what we've learned, and we have a not entirely pessimistic, but a realistic view of human nature, and then we look at all of our tools and how we want to use them to do the humanities, to take all those things into consideration every time we're presented with something new.
So I'm going to rely on my background as being trained as a clinical psychologist initially, which I really, I've gotten to a different point in terms of what I do. But I think it's really about openness to experience, openness to learning, openness to listening, openness to being flexible and evolving in life, and that's part of what humanities teaches you as you move through life. And I think it's the way that you do that on a day-to-day basis in terms of what you're doing, is the way that you kind of take that with you, and it allows you to be receptive and to be a participant observer as you're kind of going through your own life course.
Well, these are all great ways of interpreting it. As the director of the Institute for Humanities Research at ASU, I've thought a lot about this. And I actually sat down when I first got there and tried to turn the humanities into active verbs, the study of the humanities into active verbs. And I'm so pleased to tell you that you have available to you outside the results of that on the inside of this folder, which is available out there. And so I'll just read you a couple. Ask riskful questions. Interpret cultures. Connect language and reality. Welcome complexity. Investigate the historicity of every moment. Explore ways of thinking about the future. Test the limits of interpretation. Explore ways of being in the world. Dream in a new language.
Thank you. Let's thank the panelists. And now let's hear from you. What surprised you? What made you react both to the premise of the panel and to what you've heard? Participate, let us hear your thoughts, ask questions. There is help with a microphone, so raise your hand and a mic will be brought to you. And then if panelists have a response, they will give you some of their thoughts in response to your comments. So, yes.
Thank you all so much. This was terrifically interesting. I actually am an ASU alumni. I received my master's in public history at ASU, so found your reflections really fascinating. Is this working? Okay. Dr. Lester opened up by sharing about his op-ed piece, and a lot of the responses seem to reflect the incivility of the current political debate. And certainly in past times, there have been instances of incivility. What strikes me as unique maybe now is an elevation of corporate speech that is treated as individual speech in light of the Citizens United Supreme Court case. I'm curious to hear from you how you think that changes our level of humanity, our level of civil discourse, and the implications of that.
Anyone? Yes, Jean.
Money corrupts.
Yes, Wayne?
So in some dialogue I've had with some people who have spent a lot of time in Washington, I haven't, is that what ends up happening, I think, in the current scenario is that the people who many of us would like to see attracted to Washington are repelled by it. Essentially, the polarization creates a scenario where the individuals who end up coming here are less likely to be the ones who have more of a humanistic standpoint, less likely to be the ones who are open to experience and are coming here to learn, rather than to force something into a particular dogma across time. And I think that's probably if this continues, and one legislator I talked to has been here for about 30 years, his impression, he's a political scientist, is that you have the worst polarization in a century occurring currently. If it continues across time and across several different election cycles, then the long-term consequences are pretty significant.
Yes, in the back, please.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I'm Katie Benton Cohen. I teach history at Georgetown, and I'm the daughter of 2 ASU Sun Devils. I got a raised roof over there? Nice. 2 things that I thought were absent. I missed the opening remarks. I'm sorry, so if I missed them. Religion and citizenship, which certainly came up in Mr. Churchill's remarks, and I really liked what you just said about the humanities and a democracy. I just served on an NEH panel, and I thought a lot about that. Last night in Obama's speech, which was not as good as President Clinton's, I have to say, there was this one electrifying moment when he just dropped the word citizenship as if it was this shocking new idea that we should think about. And I turned to my husband and I said, I'm really actually kind of embarrassed that I'm glad I'm not teaching my US history survey. I teach American history this semester because that course is organized around the concept of citizenship and that an understanding of American history is part of being a good citizen. And I said, if I were teaching that course this semester, it would be far too partisan for me to be comfortable with because President Obama just sees that as part of his re-election campaign, which obviously shows that I was engaging deeply with that idea. But I wonder if you might say something about both those things, religion and citizenship. I teach at a Catholic Jesuit university where I previously taught at a public university that I really liked, and I would, in theory, prefer to teach at a public university, but I have really embraced, although I'm not Catholic myself, the ability to explicitly discuss and debate values that a Jesuit education invites and, in fact, encourages us to do. And I wondered if you could say basically something about religion and citizenship.
I'd like to take a shot at the citizenship side of that again and connect it with the Citizens United remark. If you ask what is disturbing about the impact of the Citizens United decision and the reason that seems threatening, surely it's because it fits into a model of the American electorate as this kind of amorphous blob upon which forces move, and those forces are supplied by money. And so it moves shakily in one direction in response to force, and then it moves shakily in another direction. And what we need in this country is a conversation about whether that's citizenship, namely habitation in the midst of that blob, or whether responsible citizenship is another posture entirely, and one that engages the deliberative skills that I was talking about earlier and connecting with the humanities. So I'm not touching on the religion side, but I think your citizenship point's very well taken.
On the religion question, yes, Sally?
Well, I appreciate your question about including religion in these discussions and discussions of citizenship. And often in public universities, there's a kind of a taboo about that. Fortunately, ASU isn't one of those universities. We have a religious studies department, and we also have a Center for the Study of Religion and Conflict. And there is, because of the way that is framed, it invites these very kinds of conversations. And although conflict is sometimes understood as a matter of war, because religion certainly is involved in a lot of the world's wars, both in the contemporary moment and historically, but it also has to do with political conflict, just conflicts of ideas, conflicts of consciousnesses, conflicts of worldviews. And it is extremely refreshing to have the forum in which to discuss those things. And it has always struck me as a big mistake that public universities have decided that these things cannot be discussed and must be kept, you must remain neutral, you must never actually seem to be supporting one religious perspective or even offending somebody's point of view. And so that brings me to, I think, a bigger danger, or an equally big danger that we face, is that the idea that religious perspectives are inviolable. and that if you proclaim that you're doing something from a religious perspective, then that's the end of the discussion. I think we need to keep these religious perspectives in the public arena where they are discussed and where people can be questioned on the basis of what they do. There is a story in today's New York Times about education in Egypt right now under the new Muslim Brotherhood, and I don't know if any of you saw it right on the front page, where women are being told that they are not made by God to make decisions or to be in decision-making roles or leadership roles, that this is what God intends, and this is part of the university instruction that they're getting. And it struck me as a cautionary tale, not that that is necessarily permissible here, but there is a sort of a fenced-off place in our public dialogue that leaves religion off to one side and does not engage those ideas in public debate. And I think as part of citizenship, we have a role to play in actually asking questions about perspectives that are called religious.
I think the founders of the National Endowment for the Humanities in '65 were relating the humanities very, very deeply to the whole notion of citizenship. I'm not sure at that time even the founders realized quite how that would play out, that what they would be encouraging is conversations among citizens, drawing on the disciplines of the humanities to just create a better future for their communities and for the country. Religion, I think, right now has become sort of an understanding of religion has become a kind of responsibility of citizenship, because we have become, as a society, so pluralistic in terms of religion. The number of religions that are now represented in the public realm are so numerous that I think it's our responsibility, really, as a part of this act of citizenship, to gain a better understanding of the diversity of the religions that we live within.
I want to thank all our panelists this morning for a wonderful conversation. I'm Phoebe Stein-Davis. I'm the head of the Maryland Humanities Council over in Baltimore. I think there was a discussion earlier about our bodies. I think we're stuck with our humanities just like we're stuck with our physical bodies. So I don't think our humanity is going anywhere. I also think that we're always already doing the humanities. So if we're going to talk about, for example, the last time that the Orioles were in a pennant race, we're talking about history. Or a friend of mine who is the lead fundraiser for a major university in Baltimore who is having a child out of wedlock. Her mother's very concerned she's going to be fired, and she has talked to her mother about the history of women's rights and American higher education and laws, and this is the humanities. My question is really for all of you, but to Dr. Kish's action words. What would it look like if we were really fully employing the humanities in our everyday lives and sharing that? So these action words that you're talking about, I'm trying to think at an everyday level what that looks like on the MARC train, for example, as I go back and forth. Thanks.
What a great question. I wish I could answer it. I mean, I wish I had the voice. Any of you? Yes, Sally.
Well, I think that what the things that John said earlier are a very good guideline for how we would apply the humanities in our lives. Your examples were good as well. I'm particularly fond of the idea of asking riskful questions, because I think that one of the things that really does keep dialogue going, one of the things that does make for the involvement of people's imaginations and their consciousness, all of which are part of what the humanities are trying to foster and feed and improve, is by knowing that the things that you say and the things that you believe are going to be questioned or should be questioned, and that we should learn how to question ourselves. So for me, that aspect of doing the humanities is a really important part of it. And the unintended consequences, part of what John was talking about earlier, I think is another way that questions could improve our record on producing unintended consequences and having to live with the consequences of those.
Here's a suggestion about what it might look like. It would mean more conversations. It would mean those conversations more self-consciously structured in deliberative and constructive ways. It would mean those conversations being based on deeper and broader and more widely shared bases of common shared understandings of texts in our history and facts of the world, the sciences. And it would mean a reach of those conversations into the real issues that structure the world we live in now and that will structure the world we live in the future. And those issues beyond the borders of this country, but across the world into other cultures and into the ways we interact with them economically, culturally, politically, and the rest of it. Mm-hmm. So more conversations, better structured, better based, further reaching.
Yes, my name is Rusty Hassan, and I work as a union representative representing employees at the National Endowment for Humanities and the Arts and National Science Foundation. I also do a jazz radio show and teach as an adjunct at Georgetown, and I formerly taught at University of Maryland University College. My question has to do with the economics and the impact that it has on the humanities. You see cutbacks in the primary school and secondary school level for music and arts programs. And you see in the higher education an emphasis on career-oriented classes rather than on humanities. And there's a real shift going on right now. It's not so much a conflict between science and humanities as with courses in, like UMUC, and major in Homeland Security with a cutback in the humanities. And how do we address that? Anybody?
Yes, Rafael.
Go ahead.
How do you address it? Well, let me take the case of the organizations you mentioned. All of these are publicly funded organizations. And so the decisions about directions are not made exclusively within the organizations, to the extent that a lot of these are questions being raised in the general public. That's where I think these conversations have to take place. So whether they're being advanced through the state commissions on the humanities, through other kinds of entities, and I assume that's one of the things that will be coming out of this discussion. That is, what else could be done to enhance what John talked about just now, conversations. I think it's probably in a couple of days I'm on a panel that's asking about what should be going on in the sciences, because the argument is that there are fewer and fewer jobs for scientists, and that's especially in certain fields. Well, that's really saying there are fewer jobs in academia, there are fewer jobs in specific institutions. That doesn't say that's the whole picture that's there. But as long as those kinds of discussions about where are the opportunities and a view that you only are prepared to do particular kinds of things, I think those questions about the resources that are going to continue to come up, but they cannot be resolved entirely within the organizations themselves. We need all the help that we can get on enhancing the discussions, the conversations, the sense of directions, and making this clear that the advantages have to accrue to the larger public. So it can't be just out of the interest of particular interest groups at all.
Wow, and I hope in the closing minutes we'll hear some concrete thoughts on how we can advance that agenda. I saw that hand first, and so there we go.
Hi, I'm Carol Olivia Haran, and as I introduced to you earlier, I'm a visiting professor, scholar at the Project Humanities, but I live here in Washington, D.C., and I'm author of the book Nappy Hair. Okay, I was particularly struck, was it Sally? With your questions are so wonderful. And you gave me an aha moment. On my way down here, driving to get here this morning, I was listening to Argonautica, the Jason's going off to find the Golden Fleece 200 or 300 years before BCE, that sort of thing. And there's a moment when Athena and Hera are trying to explain to Aphrodite why they want to help Jason. And it's because Athena says, well, I was testing human beings. I was running around down there, and there was a big raging river. Jason had to cross it, and I pretended to be an old lady. He picked me up, and he carried me across the river and put me down on the other side. And because of that, I will love Jason forever, and I will help him to get this fleece, and so forth and so on. And when I read that, I was like, I don't know why. I had never remembered that before. And I felt like, well, I thought that only the Hebraic had that kind of stuff. And here is in the Hellenic, you're getting this, thou shalt not, disrespect this old ladies trying to get across the river kind of thing. and I felt it was nobody's gone through it, and I'm making fun of it in a way, but given the 10 Commandments of the Hellenic world, and yet there it was. I felt like I had been listening because I love traveling on the boat with them, going somewhere as I go through DC, and all of a sudden I said, aha, I know them now. And that moment of picking up that old lady, who was Athena, was that. And I guess that's not a question, but I wanted to share it because you just really made it, aha, what I was doing. I was doing humanities or something.
You were doing the everyday humanities we're talking about, in which our visual representations and our stories and our history of ideas come to us in this vivid form. And I think a lot of us fear that's what we are losing when humanities and the study of ideas are cut from our universities, the study of languages. Yes, you were next, please.
I'm John Lawton. I'm the Dean of Arts and Communication at the College of New Jersey. It's a public state school. And I was asked about a year ago to come to the Institute for Advanced Studies in Brazil because they were trying to reformulate what they were thinking about in terms of how they're studying and promoting study in Brazil. And they wanted to bring a voice from a state institution in the United States that was grounded in the liberal arts because they felt like that was the direction that they needed to go, less specialty. And so I was really happy to hear what you were talking about, and I appreciate the support that Cora, that you've given us at the College of New Jersey to help with those kinds of programs, the things that we're doing. But I'm also, in a month, I'm going to an international conference on sustainability and speaking about how to engage the humanities and liberal studies in making a sustainable environment for our cities. And my question is, I'm actually asking you for some help on this one. If you could give me some ideas of how your organizations are connecting the humanities to sustainability and how it's working within your own specific organizations. Thank you.
That's a great question for Arizona State because we are very much involved in connecting the humanities with issues of sustainability. And if you have time after this, I'll be glad to give you a lot more detail. But the Consortium for Humanities Centers and Institutes is now initiating a large program about the humanities for the environment, and possibly being funded by the Mellon Foundation. And it's eventually going, we hope, to involve lots of institutions in the U.S. So one of the things that we are hoping to do is make the humanities an active form, a generative source of information and reflection, and as well as policy making and action in promoting the kinds of questions, the kinds of values, considerations, the sort of ethical issues and social justice questions that are embedded in the decisions that have to be made about how we're actually going to preserve the planet for the human race. And so our humanity is maybe more vulnerable than we think to forces beyond that we have created but now have spun out of our control. And so this raises a very important crisis moment, and the humanities is responding. So one example that I'll give, because I don't want to take too much time, is the transformation of the study of history which has often been considered throughout human history as a sort of way of reflecting on what is unique about human beings. Now historians are rethinking this distinction of humans, both from other species and from the rest of the natural world. And so natural history and human history are being reintegrated in contemporary ways of looking at what has created the present moment. So I'd be happy to talk to you more about that after.
Thank you. With 5 minutes left, I'm hoping we can now, for those who have their hands up and for the rest of you, say what you think concretely. We, as a group, ASU, as Arizona State University, is obviously engaged in this Project Humanities and pushing this agenda forward. We heard from Jean about a very concrete campaign, if you will, to reach to younger people. What ideas do you have for the kind of ideal that Cora set up for us of making sure that, and we'll talk about society in the United States, that we preserve access to these values, these traditions, these opportunities that we've debated today? What ideas do you have? And I see hands up, so just grab the mic and say it in a sentence.
I am Herman. I am the member of NPC, and I'm representing one newspaper in Jakarta. I actually want to ask further explanation about slow reading movement. To my experience, I have been journalist for teenager.
I'll tell you
I
afterwards.
worked so many places, working in the church, working in the government, private.
Yeah.
We are moving too fast as humans.
Right.
And information institutions, or what you call it, media, I'm afraid sooner or later will become corrupting force against humanity. Can you explain about slow reading movement?
I'll be glad to tell you later where that comes from my experience. Ideas on Cora's challenge?
I'm Michael Wolf, a proud graduate of Arizona State University. And I wanted to thank the university for, again, providing an opportunity to be part of a conversation about questions that are certainly profound. I'm concerned because my wife and I today didn't have the opportunity to tune into our 2.5-year-old grandson's preschool classroom to watch him do humanity. And I was struck with Dr. Kitch's questions, and I was happy to see these questions on the inside of the cover of this. I can't wait to share these with his preschool teachers because they fit that 2.5-year-old just as they have an impact on us. So when we say doing humanity, I'm struck with a book that Carl Rogers wrote years ago, Knowing is Not Necessarily Behaving. And that's what this conversation has been about today. How can we continue to infuse humanity into the curriculum of schools for preschool through the university and beyond, so that this idea of the questions that we're asking ourselves today doesn't get lost in the translation, so that we even have to bother asking the question that brought us together today. Are we losing our humanity?
Yes, Jean, please.
I'd like to respond to that gentleman's comments because I think that we're developing a model to move forward that's I refer to as Humanity 101, and asking this group to help us to forge a basic principle of what humanities means to the society. And as people get more mature and a greater experience and understanding, it can be Humanity 102 and 103, et cetera. But I think that Humanity 101 should be something that Someone who I don't have a great deal of admiration for, Grover Norquist, was able to convince a lot of people to sign a pledge. And that pledge became, I think, counterproductive. But nevertheless, he hit on something that people could be for. And I think if we could create a model so that we could then bring that model to the youngest people, to the schools, to the families, and say, here, this is what you can teach. You can do it in your office. You can do it in corporate America. Everybody should have a course in humanities. And if we have that, at least we'll have the start of something big.
You know, it's 10:30, and we must conclude, and I'm sorry to say that, but I do have, would you like to give this information?
I'd like to give that information. But
I'll
before
let-
we do that, I'd like to thank you for moderating this.
Thank you. That was my pleasure.
And to wish Rosemary a very happy birthday. What a wonderful way of spending her birthday with us. Talking, listening, connecting. Yes, so happy birthday.
Thank you.
All right.
And please join me in thanking our panelists for being here and sharing their ideas. And of course, I thank you for being here, because there could be no we if you're not here and part of that. But let me say, that was actually quite poetic, wasn't it? Yes, right. Let me just say that we could have invited you to Arizona, where it's hot and even more humid than here, but we thought we would come here, because oftentimes when we invite people home, people say, well, why don't you come visit us? So we're here visiting you. And what we'd like for you to do is to come back to Arizona at another time, like the fall, so that we can continue the discussions. But between here and there, we'd like for you to take a little bit of ASU back with you. You've heard about a number of initiatives and projects that we have. I think we're trying to show that there is a different narrative going on in Arizona. There are ways in which you can see images, Gene, of finger waving, and Senate bills and bans on ethnic studies and all kinds of, and so we're trying to say that there is never a single story. And this is another part of the Arizona story. But the Arizona story means nothing without a larger context. And that's what we are providing here. So I challenge you to be part of that story and to continue to help us come up with concrete strategies, so that this is not a discussion about Arizona State University, but this is a discussion about larger issues that have been introduced today. So please, please, please look at our table of goodies. We want you to have stuff, but we also want you to be part of what we're going to call this movement to project our humanity. And it's actually quite simple: to talk, to listen, and to connect. So talking, listening, connecting. Grab stuff. There's food. There's more stuff to eat. Continue the conversation. But please, 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 we have everybody has a website. We also have a Facebook page, but we want you to reach out to us. And it's humanities.asu.edu. Or Project Humanities, or the Institute for Humanities Research. All of the materials out there give you an opportunity to connect with us. So without you, there is no we. So thank you so much for coming. And if you liked anything that you heard, please tell somebody. If you didn't have a good time, just don't say anything. Thank you very much.